Hey, what's up, everybody? This particular video is for your review for the exam that you all have coming up. So, real quick about the exam is going to be available to you all on Thursday, and it'll be once again it'll be available to you all on Thursday morning, and it'll be available for about 2 or 3 days. Actually, I'll make it available until the entire weekend. So Monday at 11:59, I need you all to get these exams in. But the purpose of this video, and I have a few other videos that I'm going to be uploading as well, is to basically serve as a review of the unit materials that we've covered so far, and to also kind of catch you all up too from the mishap that happened a couple of weeks ago. But anyway, nonetheless, let's get right into it. So your first lecture, we covered society. So society is pretty much any geographical setting that has identifiable or very kind of like not unique, but just day-to-day operations that are particular to that particular geographic setting, geographical setting. Government is pretty much the entity that most societies have that govern behavior in society. And the thing that you all need to know about society is that cultures actually make up society, and that's for some of you all who are having difficulty making a discernment between the two. Just an easy way to think about it is that cultures are things that make up a society. All right, but under a society, we have very many different cultures and subcultures that operate under them. Speaking of subculture, there's a difference between just culture overall and dominant culture. So the dominant culture is any culture that supersedes all other cultural characteristics in society, any culture that instills norms via laws, any type of law that we follow, but it's not necessarily akin to our specific cultural heritage, would be considered a law that, well, pretty much all laws, but it would be considered coming from the dominant culture. Now, subculture, on the other hand, it operates under the dominant culture, and it might very may well have different perspectives and different behaviors from the dominant culture that they actually hold on to. Nonetheless, they still have to adhere to the norms and the laws of the society that is established by the dominant culture. Now, that brings us to social problems. So, in societies, cultures come in contact with one another. They occupy certain spaces and so on and so forth. And from society and these very intricate, um, deep day to day operations that are akin to an actual society as opposed to like a village or something like that, a lot of times we have what are called social problems that arise. Now, a social problem is going to be the antithesis of a personal problem. So basically, it's the opposite of a personal problem. A social problem is any problem that has the ability to or that does actually plague society, while a personal problem only plagues the individual. All right. So, an example of a social problem could be AIDS, any other type of epidemic having to do with disease or famine or drugs. Right now, America is currently going through what they're calling the opioid epidemic. And that just basically means that we have a very significant amount of people in our population who, for whatever reasons, right, they have these struggles with opioids. I won't even say for whatever reason, definitely through direct manipulation and agitation of the pharmaceutical industry. But nonetheless, we have that issue. It is a social problem, right? We're not looking at it in the sense of, oh, well, this is just affecting Nancy. We're saying that this is affecting Nancy and then therefore has the potential to affect Nancy's kids and have them or encourage them to develop some type of antisocial behavior. The courts, you know what I'm saying? We don't want Nancy in our courts, and so on and so forth. That's very, that's a very blanket explanation of it. Of course, there are different factors into drug abuse and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, the whole point is that something like drug abuse would be considered a social problem. Now, some of you all might be thinking, oh, well, what is a actual personal problem? Well, it's kind of hard to pinpoint. Do you think that there is any problems that a person can go through where they're not really affected by anybody else, or well, that doesn't actually affect anybody else? Is there really a such thing as a personal problem? You think? Can you think of any? Yeah, so I mean, you can give it a shot, right? But any problem that you might be experiencing, I'm pretty sure you are not experiencing it alone, right? There are people who are going to be affected, just simply because you are affected, right? And I think that speaks to the very social nature of human beings and our capacity to socialize and so on and so forth. Um, Nonetheless, social problems can come in the form of social phenomena. They don't necessarily have to, but the thing you need to know about social phenomena is that it is social phenomena is one of the motivating factors behind why sociologists do research, which I'll cover a little bit later on, perhaps in the next video. Sorry, but a social phenomena is anything a phenomenon. The plural of that would be phenomena, but a social phenomenon would be considered anything that is out of the ordinary. A phenomenon in general is anything that happens that's out of the ordinary, and it's it kind of invokes awe in a person or something like that. It kind of invokes curiosity in the person. They want to discover why this particular event took place and so on and so forth. That would be just a phenomenon. A social phenomenon is the same thing, right? For an example, and this has happened in the past before, not to be too grim, but it's a social problems class. But there have been instances where multiple people have committed suicide in close proximity of one another, um, throughout history, throughout American history or whatnot, several instances of this. Now, a sociologist might want to figure out um, why this is actually happening, right? So that would be an example of a social phenomenon, not necessarily the sociologist's curiosity, but the fact that usually when people kill each other, kill themselves, it's a suicide and it's a done deal. It's usually not something that's contagious, for lack of a better term. All right, so sociologists might study something like that. Um, Nonetheless, a social problem can come in the form of a social phenomenon, or just like an all-out outbreak where we actually know the explanation behind the phenomenon. And then the phenomenon, a social phenomenon does not have to be a bad thing, but we can actually know the root of the phenomenon, and um, that wouldn't be considered a phenomenon, right? Because we know the root of it. I'm sorry, know the root of or where the actual action or the happening is coming from, or what caused the happening. So if we know the causality of it, then that makes it not a phenomenon. But a phenomenon is partially out of the ordinary. But then also the other part of that is that we don't know what is actually causing it. So one of the ways that we figure out what causes social phenomenon is by applying the scientific method. As you all maybe have read in your lecture, there are 5 steps in this class, 5 steps to the scientific method. These steps are systematic observation. You formulate your hypothesis. You test the hypothesis. After you test the hypothesis, you analyze the data, and then you formulate your conclusion, at which point you will either accept or nullify the hypothesis that you made originally. Um, so sometimes when we do this and we go through all 5 of these steps, we are happy with the results. Sometimes not, but sometimes if we're really, really happy with the results, and everybody else in our profession or our discipline is happy with the results, then we can get credited for developing what we call theories in the social sciences. So a theory is an explanation of a specific event And then also we also have theoretical frameworks. You all should be familiarized with those. There's three of those. Theoretical frameworks are different from actual particular theories in that theoretical frameworks explain very general happenings in society. They seek to explain very general happenings in society, while the theory it explains something very specific. Okay, so maybe we could be doing a study in a particular area, investigating why so many people are committing suicide like days back, back to back to back. And we might discover that, these particular individuals, they knew each other. Um, and they had a suicide pact or something like that, something to that degree, right? And then I can go on and do some more, even more stellar research over suicide pacts, right? So if it's really really stellar, right, and if enough if enough people review it and try to test it, and they get back the same results and so on and so forth, then that particular hypothesis kind of gravitates or graduates actually to being a theory, being considered a theory. Next step after graduation, or next step after theory, is actually something becomes a law, right? It's in science we call it laws. You all might call it facts, all right? But a theory is not factual; it's just tested enough for enough people to actually use it um, as an ideal approach to something, or to study something else, so on and so forth. Okay. Once again, three paradigms in sociology or frameworks called the classic theoretical frameworks are functionalism, conflict theory, symbolic interactionism. And these all say something very different about society. Symbolic interactionism tends to focus on the more micro interactions people have on a day-to-day basis, while conflict and functionalist theories focus on institutions in society, and not necessarily just groups of people, but the actual institutions. By institutions, I mean education. I mean classes of people. And by class, I mean like upper, middle, lower class. Um, these are pretty much the things that conflict theory and functionalist theory focus on, right? The more macro level human interactions, okay? Human interaction, that takes place in the criminal justice system, so on and so forth. All right, so conflict theory. That'll be the next one I go over. It goes into detail about how, or this particular view goes into detail about the exploitative nature of what we call the bourgeois class in society, or basically the rich in society, and how they basically procure their position in society through the suffering or through the exploitation of what Karl Marx called the proletariat class in society. All right, and then the functionalists, on the other hand, they're pretty much like, oh, okay, well, if there is exploitation that's actually going on, then it must serve some type of purpose because it exists in society, right? And according to the functionalists, if something exists in society, it must be serving some type of function, for better or for worse, right? It serves some type of function that helps society operate in the measure that it actually does. Um, so yeah, those are kind of like really quickly differences in the approaches of the three theoretical frameworks. Thank you for hanging in there with me. I will be right back with another video.